announcement and security.
Yep. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back. I hope you enjoyed. Let's make sure this is all right. It may be falling off a bit, but I hope you all enjoyed. Now, can you all hear that? Good? No? Yes, good. I hope you all enjoyed this afternoon's concurrent sessions and, of course, the break. For those of you who I haven't met, my name is Debbie Terry and I have the great privilege of being Vice-Chancellor of the University of Queensland. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we are meeting here today and pay my respects and our respects to their elders, past, present and emerging, as we walk together on the path to reconciliation. Now, I'm delighted to say that we have a very special international guest for this final session of day one of this year's Universities Australia Conference. Our keynote speaker is the Honourable Sethuraman Panchanathan. He is, of course, the 15th Director of the National Science Foundation in the US, and I've had it on very good authority, and I've checked a couple of times that he is very happy to be referred to as Dr. Punch. And so I will certainly follow in this tradition, but I thought I'd better just make that clear in case people might have thought I was being just a bit too familiar. But of course, the National Science Foundation, or the NSF, as it is widely known, was established by the United States Congress in 1950 with three clear goals. First, to promote the progress of science. Second, to advance national health, prosperity and welfare. And third, to secure national defence. With an annual budget equivalent to 13.5 billion Australian dollars, the NSF supports a range of programs focused on discovery and innovation, partnerships, infrastructure and STEM education. Dr. Punch was nominated as the 15th Director of the NSF by the President of the United States in 2019, and he was confirmed in the position with unanimous support of the United States Senate on June the 18th, 2020. As the NSF Director, he's also involved as a key member of several government boards and committees that provide independent policy advice to the United States President and to Congress. Prior to being appointed to this very significant leadership role, Dr. Punch was the Executive Vice President of the Arizona State University Knowledge Enterprise, where he also served as Chief Research and Innovation Officer. With an academic background in computer science and engineering, he was Arizona State University's Foundation Chair of Computing and Informatics, and he also founded the university's Centre for Cognitive Ubiquitous Computing. He has published close to 500 articles in refereed journals and conference proceedings, and he has mentored more than 150 graduate students, postdocs, research engineers and research scientists. Dr. Punch's scientific contributions have been recognised with a number of prestigious awards, and he is a Fellow of multiple learned academies and associations, including the US National Academy of Inventors, the American Association for the Advancement of Science, the Canadian Academy of Engineering, the Association for Computing Machinery, and the list goes on. This afternoon, we have the benefit of hearing from Dr. Punch as he shares his experience accumulated over 3 decades of working across the American higher education sector and within the US government. The topic he's going to explore today is entitled Tackling the Big Issues, the Power of Research Collaboration. When he took up his current position at NSF in July 2020, an article in Science described Dr. Punch as an optimist and someone who had spent his entire career finding win-win situations with a strong commitment to user-inspired research. Around that time, Dr. Punch was also asked by Nature India to describe what he was most passionate about. His responses included innovation, encouraging entrepreneurial mindsets, partnerships, fundamental research, and creating opportunities for people from all backgrounds to realise their natural talents. He said, and I quote, "I personally believe in seeding bold, large-scale foundational research with meaningful societal impact." And again, he went on, "For me, science is extremely important if you do want to address societal problems in a constructive and outcome-oriented way." I know that there will be many people here today who agree wholeheartedly with this view. Indeed, the role of industry engagement and research collaboration in forging our future economic and social prosperity here in Australia is very much on the agenda for our university and our research sector. So, Dr. Punch, your keynote address is very timely and one that I know everyone here is looking forward to hearing. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Panchanathan to Australia and to the UA conference. Thank you, Dr. Punch.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Vice-Chancellor Terry. I mean, this has been a very kind introduction, long but kind. And I appreciate all your patience in listening to all of the things that I simply will say that, at the end of the day, all of those are all fine, but what you do with it is what matters. And so one of the things that I'm very passionate about is the following title that hopefully is something that I think you all can resonate with, because I don't think this is limited to the United States. Wherever I go all across the globe, I find that everybody seems to feel and align with what this title talks about, which is that innovation can be anywhere and opportunities should be everywhere. For far too long in the United States, while we have made a lot of progress and we have achieved a number of milestones, and yes, we have been looked upon as a model across the globe in certain areas, we still have not done what is actually needed for the nation as we advance into the future, and that is that every ounce of talent, every bit of what is possible has not been achieved. And that's because we have left and are leaving a lot of people behind as we are advancing on the trajectories for the future. Whether it is geographical differences, or whether it is socioeconomic challenges, whether it is the lack of embracing diversity, you find that there is tremendous amount of talent that is not brought into the equation and left behind. And this is an unacceptable future for any nation, particularly the United States, as we move forward. The next challenge that you find in most nations is the fact, and particularly the United States, as exciting as innovation centers are, they are still concentrated in a few regions of the United States. You can almost name them, and you will all recognize it. The Silicon Valley, Kendall Square in Boston, or in Austin, Texas. And you can go on and name them, and you'll probably have too many fingers in your hand to say that, yes, I agree, that these are centers of innovation and excellence in terms of innovation activities. And that, too, is an unacceptable future, because innovation should thrive and should be possible everywhere across the nation. And so when I came to NSF, I came from a smaller state, which is very atypical as a director coming from a much smaller state, I guess, particularly a state that has not necessarily, it's something that people will say that you will have a director from that state. And this state was Arizona. And in Arizona, we had a number of transformational things that happened over the last 20 years. And having been part of that journey, I was convinced on these two counts that it is possible to make sure that every bit of talent and idea can be embraced, nurtured, motivated, inspired, and brought to life. I also saw firsthand that despite the fact that you are adjacent to a large state, California, and particularly one of those regions which I quoted just a few minutes ago, Silicon Valley, that it is still possible to have Arizona shine and be an exemplar in certain areas of what innovation can express itself in that particular region. So having seen this firsthand, when I came to NSF, I was very confident that this can be done, and this should be done, this must be done, and this is the time to get it done all across the nation. So it is not with any fictitious thinking or wild imagination. It is with a conviction that this can be done, and therefore we will get it done. And not doing it is not an option as we think about the future. And so I just wanted to spend a few minutes on this title slide because that's exceedingly important for me to contextualize what I'm going to talk about with you today and how we are looking at the journey of NSF as we look into the future. Thanks to Vice-Chancellor Terry, she mentioned the mission statement of NSF, and therefore that saves me 5 minutes of my time, which is promoting the progress of science, advancing the national health, prosperity, and welfare, and securing the national defense. Folks, I want you to pay attention to the last piece of that mission statement, securing the national defense. In this day when all of you are thinking about research security and a whole host of things, and is it something that's consistent with what we are doing in terms of advancing research? This mission statement is 72 years old. When NSF was founded in 1950, Vannevar Bush, who was the architect of the creation of NSF, put together this mission statement for NSF, the mission statement for NSF. And what is wonderful about this mission statement is that I would not change a letter or a word in this mission statement today. In this day when strategic plans are written every 6 months or every 2 years, or if a new leader comes on board, to see that a mission statement that is relevant for so many decades and still carries us forward is truly a testament to the visionary scientist, Vannevar Bush, who set forth the National Science Foundation as an agency that will propel science, technology, innovation, discoveries, translations, and most importantly, STEM talent all across the nation being energized. So when I came to NSF, therefore, I said, how do I now take that mission statement and how do we move forward as we think about NSF of the past, the current NSF, and then how do we move into the future? And articulating this in these 3 pillar forums, the first pillar on the left is basically stating what NSF has been doing really well for many decades, and that is advancing the frontiers of research into the future, science, technology, engineering, and more into the future. And yes, NSF will continue to do that, propel even faster, and get more things done, and I call it strengthening at speed and scale, this objective of how do we advance the frontiers of research into the future. There are many, many, many things that can be evidence for the fact that NSF has done this, and one of those points of evidence is Nobel Prizes as one example. Because when you talk about NSF, the first thing that comes to mind is this is the agency that makes possible fundamental research, basic research, without necessarily worrying about what that research might result in. And this is what I call curiosity-driven research, and I will come to that in a moment. One of the ways in which the curiosity-driven research gets expressed in one of its fantastic forums and recognized in that, for that work is the Nobel Prizes. NSF has made possible over 260 Nobel laureates in the last 7 decades. There is not any agency in the United States or anywhere in the world that has that kind of a track record of ensuring that we are unleashing that kind of fundamental research quality across the board, whether it is physics or chemistry, or whether it is biosciences, medicine, or even economics. Every one of those Nobel laureates over the past several decades, many of them, will attribute their journey very early in their career to NSF investments. And so we need to do that a lot more intentionally, of course, as we advance into the future. That would not be a question at all. But it is not just that. There's got to be a lot more than that. And we will all agree, and we'll come back and revisit that in a minute, that this is something that we need to do, while at the same time also looking at the central pillar, literally the central pillar of the vision, which is, when doing so, we have to ensure that we have accessibility, inclusivity, and embracing diversity in every form as we are advancing into the future. And I call it the missing millions of talent that have been left behind, that are being left behind, and that we have left behind is not an unacceptable thing, as I have said. And I will repeat this again and again because I feel very passionate about that. And this is the central pillar of the vision, so that across the socioeconomic demographic, across the geographic diversity of the nation, across all other forms of diversity of the nation, we need to make sure that everyone feels that they have a chance at the American dream. And a third pillar, which is not because I thought 2.5 years or 3 years ago that I was going to come and give this talk in universities of Australia, that we put that pillar up. But it is something that I fundamentally believe is very, very important, because there were questions about, is NSF really serious about engaging with the global audience? Is it still going to continue to embrace international and global partnerships as we think about advancing ideas and talent all across the globe? And the answer is yes, yes, yes. And so this pillar that essentially talks about, as we advance on inclusivity, as we advance on the frontiers of research, we also need to make sure that we are securing global leadership. What does securing global leadership mean? It is not a simple statement like, well, United States has to be a leader, the rest of them have to be followers. That's not the global leadership that I'm talking about. Clearly not. It's just quite the contrary. Here, global leadership simply means that like-minded partners can configure themselves together, who have shared values and shared aspirations, so that we can all join together and join in the shared imperative of global leadership. And that's why I'm here, that's why I'm everywhere all across the globe, visiting and talking to people, because I want to assure you that science is global, and therefore anything that you want to make sure in terms of advancement of science or the deployment of scientific innovations will not happen unless we have a global perspective. And therefore, this is a very important part of the NSF's future, and we are putting a lot of effort into this. You'll hear a little bit in my remarks today. And that, in order to achieve the objectives of these three pillars and more, that we need to have this strong foundation of partnerships. NSF cannot, must not, and should not do this all alone. And it has to hyper-partner with every possible agency in the United States. Every possible industry partner, every possible foundation partner, cities, states, K-12 systems, community college systems, university systems, of course, and most importantly, international partners. Partners of every type, of every mode, of every shape. We need to make sure that the only way we advance is through partnerships. And one of the first things that you need to do when you talk about embracing partnerships outside of the agency, it all starts right here at home, which means that NSF, with all its fantastic directorates, the Mathematical Physical Sciences Directorate, the Engineering Directorate, the Biosciences Directorate, the Geosciences Directorate, the Computing Information Sciences and Engineering Directorate, and yes, the Social Behavioral Economic Sciences Directorate, which is unique, as well as the STEM Education Directorate. All these directorates, think of them as verticals. They cannot be standalone verticals. There's got to be tremendous partnerships across the directorates. If we want educational institutions to look at this new world of transdisciplinary work, which many of you are already doing, agencies like NSF, which are investing in those kinds of activities, has to first start to configure itself in ways that has that kind of an approach, which is a fused way of looking at it rather than discrete directorates themselves. As important as we need to advance the disciplinary areas of astronomy and physics and mathematics and chemistry and so on and so forth, at the same time we want to make sure that we're working across disciplines even within NSF and configuring ourselves and launching programs like how do we build a resilient planet? How do we have smart solutions for climate? How do we ensure that we are not only looking at climate science and climate mitigation, but how do we ensure that we are also looking at the facts that some of the climate activities have gone to the point where we have to adapt and be resilient to. And how can we do that with science and technology as the framing of how you advance solutions into the future? And as we do all of this, we also want to make sure that we don't preach innovation or invest in innovation, but we actually as an agency are innovative. In everything that we do, we ask the question, can we do better? Can we be more risk-taking? Can we be better in terms of organizing ourselves to address societal challenges? That every bit of what we think about as launching into the future should be with the mindset of innovation permeating every aspect of the agency, because you cannot launch innovative activities across the nation successfully unless you are innovative as an agency. And that is very, very important. It all starts at home. Otherwise, it's just, talk and no action. When I came to NSF, I realized how NSF is a best-kept secret. In fact, my Chief of Staff, Brian Stone, is here. He will often make fun and say that you might get a call periodically to NSF, and then you'll answer the call and they'll say, is it the National Sanitary Foundation? So this is the best-kept secret, NSF. While it has been there for 72 years, it might be relevant to the people that are engaging with NSF, but not to all. And therefore, we have a responsibility to make sure that we talk about NSF in terms that people can relate to. And so NSF, as I said, in the black hole discovery, you don't need to say anything. If you put up the black hole image and ask which agency might have been responsible for that, people will probably say, this must be NSF-funded project. But that's not just what NSF does alone. For example, Google, as a company, two graduate students, Larry Page and Sergey Brin, in 1994, who were funded by NSF, graduate research fellows of NSF, wrote a proposal to NSF on digital libraries project. We funded it in 1994. In 1999 rather, when they wrote the final project report, they said that we founded a company called Google a year earlier. And the rest is history. I'm going to give you many, many examples if you really care to listen to me all night long, but I'm not going to do that for you. What instead I will tell you is that there are many, many examples, thousands of examples of companies who have tied tracks back to NSF and NSF investments and NSF discoveries. Simply put, if you take your handheld device, there's probably tens of thousands of NSF projects inside the device. We can backtrack and do the tire tracks to all of those things that NSF made possible over several decades. So when I came to NSF, this lack of understanding of NSF was something that I want to see how we could address it by putting it in simple terms. And so I came up with this concept of DNA of NSF. The DNA of NSF has got two strands, like DNA does. The one strand of the DNA is what NSF is very well known for, curiosity-driven, discovery-based, exploratory research. NSF makes it possible in large measure. But the other aspect of NSF, which is the second strand that intertwines the first strand, is what I call use-inspired, solutions-focused translations or innovations. NSF makes possible that also in large measure. Hardly gets known for that. The Small Business Innovation Research Program, called the SBIR program, that you may or may not be familiar with, was actually incubated at NSF in the 70s. Now it's pretty much used by all the agencies to advance the birthing of many, many companies. So the SBIR program actually, in the 70s, late 70s, early 80s, invested in another company that you may be able to relate to, which is Qualcomm. When Whittleby came and said to NSF that I have this great idea, NSF invested to the SBIR program, and today it's hundreds of billions of dollars of company. And I'll give you one more example a little bit later. But what I'm trying to communicate here is this symbiosis. Oftentimes people will say, but that is basic research, this is applied research, this is translational research, this is companies licensing it, this is an entrepreneurial environment. These are all part of a big pipeline, is what people try to convince you. It's quite the contrary. In fact, they are so symbiotic and synergistic such that explorations make possible innovations and translations and innovations in turn make possible explorations. And this symbiosis is constantly at work, maybe not all the time. Sometimes an exploration in one decade makes possible translations in the next decade, and that then makes possible more explorations in the following decade. Whether it is a black hole discovery, whether it is a gravitational wave discovery, you can actually walk through this DNA and you can see events. And I did this for every possible field, and I have a book of these ideas of showing that any invention that you will think that is on either side actually is not on one side. It is on both sides, back and forth, and that's how we get to the ultimate expression of the innovative potential of that particular concept. And so I call it innovation anywhere, opportunities everywhere, when you look at the symbiosis working in its full form. I said earlier that these directorates that we have at NSF, as powerful as they are, as effective as they are in their disciplinary programs, we wanted to make sure even the concept of those pillar-like thinking is actually an erroneous concept. These are actually highly fused entities. And today, all my leaders of these directorates have constant conversations about how they might synchronize their activities together so they might solve some fundamental problems for humanity and society. And that some of these are not even these vertical concepts. The social behavioral economic sciences is actually, one could argue, a horizontal concept that weaves and threads everything that we do. Yesterday, 2 days ago, I was in Sydney talking about the AI program that we launched for humanity and talking about the responsible AI, trustworthy AI. And trustworthy AI is talked about today because we don't have the basis for social behavioral economic sciences being at the front end, but instead at the back end. And so any technology development requires social behavioral economic sciences as part of the early discussions, so that might then help you to realize all those challenges of privacy, ethics, bias, and a whole lot more, even before they get deployed, before they get designed, or even before they get conceptualized. And this is something that if NSF does not do in terms of its own organizational structure and making possible that thinking, then clearly the technologies that come out will be expressed in that form, which is what causes problems thereafter, and therefore does not get adopted in its fullest form by humanity and society. So let's take an example of curiosity-driven research, because I would like to make sure I at least give you a few examples on these fronts, so that hopefully that excites you a little bit. On the curiosity-driven research, this black hole discovery was made possible not because just one scientist in a lab sat and worked with an instrument, as exciting as it is, and came up with the discovery. It was actually 300 computer scientists, researchers, astronomers, and engineers all working together from 80 international institutions, international institutions, 8 different telescopes across the globe, configuring themselves together in order to image this black hole. So these things already are wired in a way that international collaborations are an absolute necessity in order for us to actually get to the fundamentals of exploring the universe or fundamentals of exploring, your own body. So whatever that might be, you need that kind of, I don't have to convince this audience, but I always like to profile people because it's all about the people. When somebody asks me, what does NSF do? In one simple line I can say, or sentence I can say, NSF makes possible unbelievable people, unbelievably innovative people at all levels. That's what NSF does best. And here is an example of Katie Bowman. Look at her journey. Look at the journey of Katie Bowman. She's a stellar scientist, no pun intended. But here, as a high school student, she was engaged in research when she was in the vicinity of Purdue University. And then she went on to do her undergraduate research, again with an NSF-funded project at University of Michigan. And then she won the NSF Graduate Research Fellow in 2011 at MIT. She went and pursued her graduate programs, and then went on to do a postdoc at MIT. And during her postdoc years, she was part of 4 research awards, 4 research projects funded for graduate research at MIT. And now, she's a faculty member at Caltech, funded by the NSF Early Career Award. Look at the journey of NSF all through the life of Katie Bowman here. And she was responsible, as one of the major team members, providing the computational frameworks for the discovery of the black hole. This is but one example of thousands and thousands and thousands of Katies that are out there. But that's not enough. We need those millions and millions and millions of Katies who are left behind to also be energized like what Katie was able to do with her own experience. And that's what NSF is focused on intensely, in addition to unleashing the Katies that exist today, but also looking and finding for those Katies that needs to be energized for tomorrow. Let me give you another example on the other side, which is basically the expression of this on the right-hand side, use-inspired, solutions-focused research. Let me give you the example of another person, because I'm going to talk about people. Stories of people are more compelling than necessarily only their scientific discoveries. So here is a person. His name is Jason Kelly. And he and Reshma Shetty are two graduate students in the year 2000 at MIT. And they are two students funded by the NSF Graduate Research Fellowship in the year 2000. They start their journey in MIT, and they are supervised by two unbelievable faculty members, Tom Knight and Drew Endy at MIT. And they're pursuing their research in synthetic biology. In mid-2000s, Drew Endy and Tom Knight proposed to NSF. Not only they have gotten their fundamental research projects funded by NSF, now they come to NSF in mid-2000s, and they say, we want to build a research center for synthetic biology engineering called Sinberg Center. So NSF funds that center as one of those centers that we fund. Right now, we have 75 of them all across the nation of different types. So here is the Sinberg Center in 2005. And Jason Kelly and Reshma Shetty, as graduate students, are part of this center, too. And then they propose to spin off a company with the work that they have done in synthetic biology. And in 2009, they write a proposal to NSF for the Small Business Innovation Research Program, Phase 1. And they get funded by NSF. And they come back to NSF in 2010, and they say, we want to now build on top of that. And Phase 2 of SBIR, we fund that again, Phase 2A and 2B. And then we have other agencies co-funding their small business innovation research work. And today, that company, Ginkgo Bioworks, which was funded by NSF, all through the journey of the persons, and now the company is worth more than $5 to $6 billion, operating out of Boston, Massachusetts. I promised you there are thousands and thousands of examples. Here I've given you at least 3 to demonstrate the impact that NSF has. It is not just NSF. It's what we do when good scientific ideas are invested in by good people, and how do we unearth and get more good people brought to the fore. And that's what NSF does best, and we want to continue to do that at speed and scale. So while doing this, when I came to NSF, I also realized that this is the moment. This is the moment that we need to take full advantage of all the fantastic work that is happening in the directorates, but be more intentional and be very, very specific about the fact that this is a moment that the intensity and intentionality has to be expressed in a way that we can take these fantastic discoveries, whether it is AI or quantum or biotechnology, advanced wireless, you name it, advanced manufacturing, you name it, whatever that might be. How do you take these fantastic ideas and rapidly translate them so that they can then, working with the industry ecosystems and entrepreneurial innovation ecosystems, so they can rapidly be translated out in a very quick way, and ensuring that every idea that is worthy of translation is taken full advantage of and invested in. And while doing so, it is not just one way, as I said earlier, that the drawing out of those fantastic ideas now gets fed back so that more of the work happens in the directorates to advance those technologies of not only today, but the technologies of the future, the scientific ideas of the future that become the basis of the technologies of the future. So we are now talking about, at NSF, not only industries of the future, but what are the elements of the future of the industries of the future, and what that might be. So we have to work on all of those fronts at the same time, while keeping in mind that you want to make sure that you're able to accelerate all of this. And so when I came to NSF, we launched a new directorate called Technology, Innovation, and Partnerships, called the TIP Directorate, which is a cross-cutting directorate of NSF that essentially works on all the scientific ideas being drawn out rapidly. And this TIP Directorate is the first new directorate at NSF in 31 years. The time is now. And that directorate has a number of objectives. How do we accelerate public-private partnerships? We have a number of examples on public-private partnerships. Let me throw a few out here. We engage with industry quite extensively these days in the front end. Rather than having the industry come in and work in the academic institution that we invest in, can we bring the industry investments and co-investments so that we might launch on programs at NSF that then configure industry consortiums working with us in areas of emerging technology interest of industry, and not specifically for a industry, but a consortium of industry. So the Platforms for Advanced Wireless Research, called POWER program, is a $100 million program, and $50 million, half of it, is invested in by industry, 35 companies investing in this, co-investing with NSF, so that we might with not only what they provide as data and other kinds of assets that industry brings to the table, that we might be able to unleash the next generation of wireless activities at speed and scale. Just last week, we launched the Future of Semiconductors initiative with IBM, Samsung, Ericsson, and Intel. Again, a $50 million program working with our industry partners. It's very, very important. While we are energizing fundamental research, you also want to make sure that the translation research is not something that we do in isolation, but actually in partnership with industry. There are, again, hundreds of examples of this. I'm not going to go into all of them, but I just wanted to give you a sort of a bird's eye view of this, of how we are looking into the future. But while we are doing this, we want to ensure, Vice-Chancellor Terry talked about the fact that entrepreneurship is something that I feel very compelled, because I find that the entrepreneurial bug has to infect every youngster so that they might express themselves in different form. Some may start companies, some may use their entrepreneurial sort of experiences to be able to contribute to whatever activities they engage in, whether it is in public service, academia, industry, wherever they may go, that spirit is extremely important. And therefore, we are trying to see how we might increase the scale and scope of entrepreneurial activities all across the nation, with the mindset of entrepreneurship more important than even the entrepreneurial ventures that get birthed out of that activity. So there are many, many pathways we are building for entrepreneurship. You might all know about the I-Core program, the Innovation Core program that got launched about 10 years ago, and where people get a boot camp-like activity to take their idea, whether it is a faculty member, a postdoc, or graduate student. Excuse me. I had my own boot camp experience as an I-Core fellow for my research, for my NSF research project. I can tell you firsthand that that was the most life-changing experience for me. Thank you so much. I thought I knew it all. And in the first day of the I-Core boot camp, they told me what I absolutely did not know at all. It was a very humbling experience. But out of that came a full understanding of how to configure my thinking, not only for basic research, but if I'm really serious about applying my work for the benefit of humanity or economy, how I should rewire my thinking. This I-Core program is really a fantastic program, now replicated again by many other agencies across the United States. So I'm very proud of that program. How do we scale that program? Not just thousands of people, but hundreds of thousands of people being touched by that program. We just launched a new program called Entrepreneurial Fellowships. How do we take those graduate students, PhD students, for example, who have the entrepreneurial mindset, and give them 3 years of a fellowship that they can go and immerse themselves in an entrepreneurial environment, be actively mentored by entrepreneurs so that they can actually express their entrepreneurial talent in the fullest form, rather than just putting their feet in, just diving in and seeing how they can express that in the fullest form. So we launched this program recently. As well as we just launched this program 2 weeks ago, Accelerating Research Translation. How do we invest in academic institutions so that we can build these research translation programs all across the United States? And how do we take the Small Business Innovation Research, SBIR, STTR programs, and how do we scale them? And let me give you an example. There are thousands of companies. This is a company out in California called Blue River Technologies, building a lettuce bot. A lettuce bot that goes around the fields, ensuring that the lettuce is cut to size, and make sure that smart agricultural practices are used to increase the yield, also to speed up the process. And so these are excellent examples of companies. I was in the University of Illinois the other day, another company that is using robots for agriculture, where they're using the robots to measure the soil content, using the robot to measure the moisture content, so very precise agriculture. How do we make sure that water is only used in places where water is needed, rather than spraying water everywhere and wasting water? So these kinds of ideas expressing itself in these kinds of ventures is really exciting to see. So these SBIR, STTR funds make possible these kinds of innovative activities. When I came to NSF, I also wanted to make sure, as I said earlier in the beginning of the talk, that I wanted innovation should be possible anywhere. And I have this theory that, if Bell Labs of the 60s and 70s made unbelievable innovation possible by a private sector company creating this lab, and the lab made up of people who are both from the academic sector and industry sector, all working together with no badges. I am academic, I'm a faculty member, or I'm an industry researcher, but all working together and making possible unbelievable innovations. The question then is, can we not have Bell Labs everywhere across the United States, not funded by one company, but funded by public-private partnerships. But essentially, the innovation basis being what is local to that place, place-based innovation. And so I'm sure that a place like Nebraska, Iowa, Kansas, Indiana, and Illinois, that region, where else would you build the future of agriculture than right there, which is the live-in laboratory for agriculture? Would you not want to build an innovation ecosystem right there on the future of agriculture, where new companies are birthed, existing companies like John Deere are expanding? You build the educational innovation ecosystems around that so that you have a complete coverage of everything that is needed in that ecosystem. Not limited to that, but as an example. All across the nation, we could do this. So we started to conceptualize a new program called Regional Innovation Engines. And we sent this out. And by the way, folks, the TIP Directorate was launched in 1 year. And then all these programs was launched in the next 6 months. When we talk about working at speed and scale, it's not just hand-wringing and conceptualizing and writing plans. It's actually getting down to the details and getting it done and not waiting for time to pass, because there's no time to waste. And therefore, these kinds of innovation engines bring together unbelievable ideas from all across the nation. So we launched this Regional Innovation Engines call. 3 months later, we had 670 concept papers. And these concept papers came from all of these places across the United States, not only all the states, but territories of the United States, everyone being represented, everyone submitting concept papers that demonstrates that innovation potential is everywhere. Which means that we have a responsibility now to unleash that innovation potential that is there all across our nation. So here is an example of, a concrete example. In 3 months, these 670 concept papers were submitted. We didn't belabor them by asking them, give me a 25-page proposal. We said just a 2-page concept paper is all that is needed to express your idea. And then what we did uniquely at NSF, which we have never done before, we published publicly all the 670 concept papers. And so that people may know what the others are doing, and that they will start to hyper-partner, knowing what the others are up to, and then they formed even stronger teams across the nation. And now we are in the process. We have a couple of hundred full proposals that have come out of that. We'll probably make possible 50 of them, each of them at $1 million scale, to get those ideas bubbling up. While at the same time, we're also looking at the next phase of the regional innovation engines, and the call has gone out, and that is at $160 million scale over 10 years for each of them. So that we can launch on these instead of talking about them. How might we get the entrepreneurial ecosystems engaged in this? How might we get industry engaged in this? So that's the kind of activity that is getting spawned by the TIP Directorate right now. And this has garnered a lot of attention across the country because the CHIPS and Science Act, which you might have all heard about, proposes a tremendous infusion of investments at NSF. Already this year, the NSF budget has grown by 12%, the largest ever increase to the budget, $1 billion more. Our budget is now $10 billion. And that's because we are able to communicate the value of those investments and what it can do, not only unleash basic research, but also these kinds of activities all across the nation that means something to everybody who can relate to that. Along with that, when I came to NSF, I realized, why is that? Why is that only the top universities in the United States do have access to the funds from NSF in large measure? Why is it that the other institutions don't have the same capacity and the capability to be able to access funds from NSF? And the answer turns out to be, and people will tell you, oh, but they don't have the great ideas, that's why. Totally false. Ideas and talent are democratized all across the nation. It's because of the fact that we need to make sure that those ideas are able to present themselves in a form that transcends the gold standard merit review of NSF. And it turns out that established institutions have all of these features that you have in this, around the circle here, that they are offered in order for them to be successful for faculty. But emerging institutions don't have those offices, cannot invest in those offices. Imagine a historically black college or a university. Imagine a tribal college. Imagine a minority-serving institution. They will never have this ability. Or a Research 2 institution. They will never have the ability to do this. So I said that cannot be the basis by which we exclude good ideas. So we launched a new program called Granted. We are good at acronyms. Growing Research Access through Nationally Transformative Equity and Diversity. This program is a virtual research office that's going to be available for anybody, anyone who's able to now have this idea and be helped with research office that they too can have their idea transcend the gold standard merit review. So it's not about talk, it's about action to make sure that we are inclusive of all of that. So in international collaboration, therefore, I'm not going to spend too much time. There are many facilities that we support across the globe. You all know this. Telescopes, in Chile, billions of dollars of investments. NSF is really good at doing that. The South Pole, we manage the Antarctic and the Arctic programs for the nation. So we have significant investments in various laboratories. You all probably know this already. The CERN, NSF has got investment with our international partners. Every one of them are international partners who are co-investing with that. And these are some of our countries who are partners now, but we want to change the landscape to include as many of those like-minded partners who want to work with this. And so the strategies for international partnerships are plain and simple. What can we do with global scale research activities? We just launched a global center yesterday in Sydney, the global center with Australia, with UK and Canada and the United States. A $5 million scale investment from NSF, hopefully equally invested in by all the 4 partners. Imagine the scale, $20 million scale centers or $10 million scale centers to do large activities like climate change research. Well, because we are in Australia, this is just in the last 6 to 8 months, the number of visits back and forth by Minister Husick, Kathy Foley, Chief Scientist, as well as Larry Marshall from CSIRO, both back and forth. And you can see that the intensity, and this is not just limited only to Australia, folks, but since I'm here, I'm talking about this. This is the future of NSF that makes possible unbelievable global partnerships and therefore unleashing fantastic ideas and talent all across the globe and solving global grand challenges. I know I exceeded my time, so I'm going to let you ask any questions that you may have, but I didn't want you to miss the opportunity of hearing where NSF is going, because some of you may know, some of you may not know, but I feel that I should be the spokesperson talking about NSF, if not anyone else. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Punch, and that was just a wonderful overview. And I know there's going to be lots of questions, but can I just start off first with a couple of questions? What you articulated was a number of very significant changes you've made since you've been in your role. What would you say was the most difficult part of making those changes, not only within NSF, but actually having an impact more broadly in the broad scientific and research community that you obviously work so closely with?
I think, if I were to pick one challenge, the assumption that somehow good ideas and talent may not be possible everywhere is something that you have to actually transcend. People want to believe it, but many of them don't necessarily believe it. And so you have to show by examples everywhere. So I've spent a lot of time traveling all across the nation with senators, congressmen, and congresswomen, and actually demonstrating that it is possible, that these things can happen anywhere and everywhere. So it takes a lot of effort, because people are fundamentally skeptical about that. Yes, this is all great, but do you really believe that you can unleash that kind of talent and ideas everywhere? So just in the last 2 months, I was in Mississippi State, Pittsburgh State, you might not have heard of these universities, Wichita State, right? Virginia Commonwealth University, just in the last 2 months, with various delegation members in New Hampshire, everywhere. So I believe fundamentally, if we don't do that, Clemson in South Carolina, I think we have to be there, showcase what's going on, and configure ourselves to see what is possible. That is a challenge.
Yeah, no, thank you, Dr. Punch. And I, from my own background, I was obviously delighted to hear you recognising the critical importance of social, behavioural and economic sciences right at the beginning of big, major, multidisciplinary research projects. How do you ensure that occurs?
So basically, what we have done is, we have taken the SBE, the Social, Behavioral, Economic Sciences, is a directorate, yes, if you want to look at it as a vertical. But I've always postulated that SBE is not just a vertical, but it's also a horizontal. And therefore, in any conversations, whether it is AI or climate change or quantum, it doesn't matter what it is, we have always brought in the social, behavioral, economic researchers into the discussion, even as we are conceptualizing the call for proposals, that they are part of what might be possible by SBE researchers to contribute in these activities. So this is something that is very intentional. And the only way we're going to get progress made is by having that intentionality at NSF And then when the community, the academic community sees what NSF is doing, then they will configure themselves the same way in order to respond to that. So first is the belief that that's important, and as I said in my remarks, I'm very happy that all my leaders, engineering, computing, bio, it doesn't matter who they are, geosciences, everybody, they all believe that SBE is a very, very important component of how they need to make sure that real progress is made in terms of what they're doing.
Yeah, no, that's, I mean, I absolutely agree with you. Do you find that all aspects of SBE are willing and able and keen to be involved?
I think, the obvious ones, they get engaged right away.
Yeah.
But then as people see the others engaging, they too feel, how can I configure my ideas into this, evolution of technology or a scientific idea? It's fantastic. I mean, there are many examples. I mean, I'll tell you the COVID example. We all know that we had fantastic vaccines in such a short time. I mean, by any stretch of imagination, it's fantastic. But the deployment of that suffered. The adoption of that suffered. That's because of the fact that SBE was not part of that right up front in terms of how we conceptualize the solution pathways. So I think, and we invested in a number of projects. And I won't have time to talk about this here, but if you're interested, I'm happy to tell you. It's just amazing to see the validation of that through those projects.
No, thank you,
Excuse me.
Dr. Punch. And you can see quite a few questions coming up here. I'm going to go to one here.
Excuse me.
Thank you. Oh, sorry, I should have.
Yep.
And one that's come up in the middle here. In Australia, research funding favours larger metropolitan universities. What can be done to level the playing field for regional universities with perhaps less access to resources?
I think the first thing that we need to do is that agencies have to make sure that they prioritize that as an objective. That's the first thing. If it doesn't happen, then nothing will happen. They have to prioritize that. Second is programs like Granted need to ensure that ideas from those regional universities are put in a form that transcends the gold standard merit review of ARC, CSIRO, and other granting mechanisms. That's a number two. Number three is to make sure that when we launched programs, it is not only that when you have center programs, that we have major universities, major research universities, we are expecting them to partner with some of the regional universities as part of the call itself. So that will help, because that then ensures participation of those universities. Lastly, which I'm emphasizing a lot, is that in fact, the leadership of some of those centers should be by those regional universities, but they should invite the participation of the major research universities, just the flip of the model, so that there is more willingness for the major research institutions to want to partner. All of the above, I think, need to be the strategies that we should use. Because remember, if universities don't have the access to those research grants, good faculty will not go to those universities. This will perpetuate this divide between haves and have-nots. And so we need to mitigate this, because at the end of the day, we want our students to be trained by the best minds. And best minds has to be everywhere. If you really are serious about that, you need to ensure that the availability of resources for those ideas should be made possible. This is a bootstrapping mechanism. We have to do that.
And I'll go to a second question, and you can see there's quite a few here. Most are anonymous at the moment, so there's another anonymous one here. And it goes to the collaboration piece, that when you're trying to promote collaboration externally, how do you encourage businesses, universities, entrepreneurs, etc., to set aside competition to facilitate collaboration?
Well, what you do is you say, I'm going to work with you in co-creating the call so that it is relevant to your interests. But if it is relevant to your personal interest only, one-on-one, then this is not the mechanism of doing that. But what we can tell you is, when we talk about 6G, the consortium of 35 companies, all of them are interested in the fundamental aspects of understanding how to make progress in 6G. So they all came together and they invest. So the compelling thing is the idea. It's always the idea. The compelling idea that people feel that if I work together, then all of us can make progress, and then we can go about then building our own one-on-one channels to further explore that. That's the way to do it. And so whether it is AI, I mean, I've got so many examples. AI institutes, again, co-funded by Intel, Accenture, Google and Amazon on a $20 million scale. I can go on and on and on. You know, in fact, when we launched the AI institutes, I said AI institutes that we launched with AI in every state. Okay, the first iteration, 2 of the 7 AI institutes, each $20 million scale, were fully invested by US Department of Agriculture. Because we went and told them, you want the future of agriculture? You want to co-invest with us? They invested $20 million each. And we invested $100 million in every year so that we could sort of create these institutes that advance AI, pure AI, and also AI in context, whether it is weather, whether it is agriculture, whether it is learning. So it's an intentional effort to build the programs in a way that you bring them in the front end, sit with them, co-create, and then co-evolve those programs.
Which goes really nicely to another question here from Michael McArdle. Does the NSF receive a return on investment from companies that spin out on IP that's been created by NSF funding?
I hope not. Okay? Because you have to understand, the job of NSF, I know it's a very simple thing, right? Why don't you get more money, therefore you can then build your base to be much larger. That's not what NSF is about. NSF is about high risk and high reward, folks. You invest in those ideas that maybe has a chance of succeeding. If you take this approach of gathering equity and making money, guess what your review process will become? Your review process will become just like venture capitalists. Is this going to actually make it? What is the success rate of making it? Yes, that should be a factor. But if that's the only factor and the lens that we use, we will not be doing justice to the fantastic ideas, which may not seem at the outset to have the potential, but has shown time and again has the potential. So that's what public investment is about. Public investment is about investing in high-risk, high-reward ideas and let the market then take hold and do good with it. And all the universities, having done that role, the universities in the United States, as you know, the Bayh-Dole Act has given the universities who receive the funding and where the technology ideas emanate, they own the IP. But I hope and pray that those universities make it so easy for industry to license it or entrepreneurs to license it. Holding on to, we all know that 90% or more of those IPs don't see the light at the end of the day. So somehow we think everything is going to become a Google and hold on to it. Let's not transact it. Let's make sure that we're going to hammer them with as much royalty as I can get. The pride is what kind of a deal I made, but not what I ultimately made possible as a company's success. So I hope that all of us have that view that we let the IP go and proliferate and succeed. And if there is a windfall, have a windfall provision where you get the proceeds. That's the way we would want to do it. I will humbly submit that.
Absolutely, completely agree with you. Now, we're running out of time, but I would like to go to this final question. Since the launch of Granted, what success has the NSF had in supporting First Nations researchers using Indigenous knowledge systems to address questions of importance to First Nations communities, which I think takes us very, very much back to our first major session here today.
Perfect. This is a fantastic question. So Granted is just launched so that you know the expectations. I know sometimes we all want everything to work right away, and I want that too. And I'm told time and again that I'm an impatient fellow. So yes, Granted is the program has been launched. But let me tell you about the Indigenous communities and for us, the Native American, Native Alaskan, Native Hawaiian communities. One of the things that we have done in our programs is to ensure that the cultural sensitivities and embracing the culture and developing curriculum around the culture for STEM K-12 as well as beyond is something that NSF is supporting in its programs. And we take a lot of pride in that. Because if you really are serious about bringing in the First Nations and the STEM talent from all across, you need to make sure that the way you build the STEM curriculum, the way you build the ideas is factored in all of the cultural context into the curriculum. So NSF invests heavily in those kinds of activities, if that's at least a partial answer to this. But the report card on Granted is yet to be delivered. So we'll have that soon. Okay? But I'm confident that we will succeed. Well, I'm an optimist.
Which is fantastic, and we'll look forward to welcoming you back to Australia to hear all about it in the future. I love Australia, yes. Time is up, and I know everybody will be keen to get ready for the dinner tonight. Delighted that you'll be joining us, Dr. Punch, so there'll be time for more discussion. Thank you so much for this afternoon. Thank you, Vice-Chancellor Terry. Thanks to all of you.
Thank you. Thanks to all of you. Thanks for all that you do. I mean, you're all doing an amazing job, and thank you for the partnership. And all these questions, never be worried. Just catch me at dinner and ask me these questions, okay? Until my voice completely disappears, I promise to answer them.
Thank you.
The internationalization of higher education through mobility of students has grown considerably over the past few years. They add to the skilled workforce and create meaningful connections. But also, there have been instances of documentary frauds at the time of admission. To eliminate that, a thorough background check is required by the institutions. This is where the need of a trusted credential evaluation partner, CredEvaluate Global, arises, who follows due diligence, ensuring the onboarding of only genuine candidates to top institutions. Specializing in assessing frauds, CredEvaluate Global conducts due diligence using AI-powered software platform, CredEvaluate Assessment Central, to assess the credentials of the applicants. We consistently achieve operational excellence in faster turnaround time with high quality, integrity, ethics, and transparency. We endeavor to become the trusted and preferred compliance partner to the global institutions.